Hello, and welcome to the Cultural Capacity Podcast. My name is Gonzalez-Howard. I'm one of your teachers here on the Cultural Capacity Podcast. The Cultural Capacity Podcast is produced, created, and sponsored by Educator Aid. At Educator Aid, we help individuals and organizations better understand themselves, their teams, and how they connect and communicate cross-culturally. If you'd like to book a call with us today, please feel free to visit www.educatoraid.com for more. Now, let's get right into this episode. Under quote-unquote normal circumstances, I usually put out a workplace wellness episode about once a month, usually on a Friday, and typically our episodes are released every single Friday. Yesterday was feeling a little bit heavier and different for me, and I didn't feel in the space of really talking about workplace wellness, so I'm going to try something different instead. I am an avid reader, always have been, always will be. Huge fan of biographical works. Autobiographical memoirs are one of my favorite. I love hearing the voice of other people and their experience, and you often learn so much about the nitty-gritty of a person's life from reading from their point of view. I will warn you, typically we keep these episodes around 10 to 15 minutes long, so it's easily digestible, but today, being a special day in a lot of different ways, I'd like to take a little bit longer. So if you need to divide this podcast into several segments so that you can take the whole thing, it will be a little bit on the heavier side, so trigger warning. In the nature of the world that we live in today, where information is so readily available and at our fingertips 24/7, it's easy to wake up and forget that we actually can and should take a break from some of the input that we're getting, and maybe fill that time and space with something that creates in us a sense of deep reflection and empathy building. If our entire world circumstance could come with a trigger warning, that would probably be best. However, unfortunately, we have to face head-on difficult situations from time to time, and through that, we learn to do better the next time. Not to bring more heaviness to the state of the conversation, I have not really personally wanted to put my opinions out there too much on any of the conflict going on in Israel and Palestine right now, just because it's such a complicated issue and it is really outside of my zone of deep knowledge, so I choose not to speak on that at this time. I think it's abundantly wise for all of us in this moment and other moments that we have previously shared as well as a society to really tap into the fact that we need to be really self-aware of our own beliefs, values, opinions, etc. before we go ahead and put them out there to the world for ingestion. Personally, I always want to make sure that when I share something, it's coming from a lens of expertise, that I have an actual life experience with whatever issue it is that I'm speaking with, and that it's also said in such a way that is not divisive, that it's open to conversation, states, facts, however, allows room for other conversation, because there are definitely multiple points of view in any conflict we ever have in life. While I have been following closely the news coming out of Israel and Palestine this week and the commentary surrounding that, I tend to think that it is not productive for many people to be contributing to the discourse at this moment. Just because we are in such a fraught situation really lends itself to not become inflamed and not become aggressive in our points of view. My personal religious beliefs keep me from activating a sense of tyranny or anger or undue patriotism, where patriotism is not called for. I tend to think that pacifism keeps me the most grounded in my faith, and that is my personal belief, and perhaps you have another way of thinking. Today, I'm not going to be discussing any of the war that is going on in our world at this moment, but what I am going to be reading to you is an excerpt from the book Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman. This book was first published in 1949 and is a very, very engaging and challenging book for me personally to read, coming from a former upbringing in the Baptist and evangelical churches. having now deconstructed and disassociated myself from those particular sects of Christianity, my faith identity currently is kind of, I study a lot of the mystic Christians from the ancient days to kind of see what their values and beliefs and observations were about Jesus and about God and Spirit and Creator. I also draw a lot of my personal faith from my heritage of half of my family lineage is in the Anabaptist religion, meaning Amish Mennonite. While I associate a lot with the tenets of these different ways of looking at the gospel, I do not subscribe to a lot of the legalism and cult-like behavior that is in some of these groups. What really draws me in is the mission and drive and godly mandate for us to love each other and keep the peace. So I am a pacifist, which means I do not ever want to engage in conversation or action that involves violence from my end of things. For me, that means deeply learning my own values and beliefs, and then very carefully navigating difficult conversations with others in ways that are open to hearing what they have to say, and also cultivate mutual respect in civil discourse. As a pacifist, I do not claim to be a nationalist in any way, shape, or form. I do not pledge my allegiance to any country or nation. I pledge my allegiance to God, and I believe that when we pledge our allegiance to different nationalistic ideals, values, objects, etc., that it takes away from our allegiance to God. It's my personal belief on that. I do not hold any type of judgment against people who believe this is the right thing to do. There are different reasons that people pledge allegiance to their nation, one of which is, having military service for themselves or in their family, and maybe that means something completely different to them. But from my purview, I do not have that in my lineage. I come from a line of pacifists and also rebels from Puerto Rico. I'm not going to talk much of that today. That's the other half of my lineage is from Puerto Rico. And so we have a history of oppression in that colonized state. And I'm not going to get into that again today, but that has that influences me also in the ways that I move about and express different opinions about oppression and loving others. That is enough about me and my personal viewpoints and kind of an overarching view of where I stand in life at the current moment. I'm going to go ahead and get into this text. And again, this is not meant to bring division at all. Quite the contrary. I hope that whatever side of an argument you find yourself on, especially in this moment, I hope and pray that you can maybe look through a different lens today as you hear this, and maybe not feel obligated to take a side. Sometimes things are very non-binary in life. We have that word thrown into our culture right now, specifically when in regards to gender identity. But I, think of non-binary things all throughout life, and sometimes, most often, I feel, in order to have compassion and empathy for ourselves and others, we almost can't take sides because there are so many nuanced discussions to be had. So, with that being said, let's dig into this text. I'm going to be reading from chapter 4, entitled Hate. I will be reading excerpts that I pull from maybe not even sequentially, so I highly recommend that you either purchase this book to read for yourself or listen to it on an audiobook. For anyone inside or outside of the Christian faith, I think it's a very beautiful and eye-opening way of looking at faith and how we present ourselves to the world. Howard Thurman writes, "Hate is another of the hounds of hell that dog the footsteps of the disinherited in season and out of season. During times of war, hatred becomes quite respectable, even though it is masqueraded often under the guise of patriotism. To even the casual observer during the last war, it was obvious that Pearl Harbor attack by the Japanese gave many persons in our country an apparent justification for indulging all of their anti-colored feelings. Keep in mind, this language is used in the lens of a black man in 1949. This is when this is written. In a Chicago cab en route to the university from Englewood, this fact was dramatized for me. The cab had stopped for a red light. Apropos of no conversation, the driver turned to me saying, "Who do they think they are? Those little yellow dogs think they can do that to white men and get away with it." During the early days of the war, I noticed a definite rise in rudeness and overt expressions of color prejudice, especially in trains and other public conveyances. It was very simple. Hatred could be brought out into the open, given a formal dignity and a place of respectability. But for the most part, we are not vocal about our hatred. Hating is something of which to be ashamed unless it provides for us a form of validation and prestige. If either is provided, then the immoral or amoral character of the hatred is transformed into positive violence. Christianity has been almost sentimental in its effort to deal with hatred in human life. It is sought to get rid of hatred by preachments, by moralizing, by platitudinous judgments. It has hesitated to analyze the basis of hatred and to evaluate it in terms of its possible significance in the lives of the people possessed by it. This reluctance to examine hatred has taken on the character of superstition. It is a subject that is taboo unless there is some extraordinary social crisis, such as war, involving the mobilization of all the national resources of the common life to meet it. There is a conspiracy of silence about hatred, its function, and its meaning. Hatred cannot be defined, it can only be described. If I were to project a simple diagram of hatred revealing the anatomy of its development, the idea would be to break down as follows. In the first place, hatred often begins in a situation in which there is contact without fellowship. Contact that is devoid of any of the primary overtures of warmth and fellow feeling and genuineness. Of course, it must be borne in mind that there can be an abundance of sentimentality masquerading under the cloak of fellowship. It is easy to have fellowship on your own terms and to repudiate it if your terms are not acceptable. When we give to the concept a wider application, it is clear that much of modern life is so impersonal that there is always opportunity for the seeds of hatred to grow unmolested. Where there are contacts devoid of genuine fellowship, such contacts stand in immediate candidacy for hatred. In the second place, contacts without fellowship tend to express themselves in the kind of understanding that is strikingly unsympathetic. There is understanding of a kind, but it is without the healing and reinforcement of personality. Rather, it is like the experience of going into a man's office and, in that moment before being seated, when the full gaze of the other is focused upon you, suddenly wondering whether to button your vest, but not daring to look. In a penetrating, incisive, cold understanding, there is no cushion to absorb limitations or to provide extenuating circumstances for protection. It is a grievous blunder to assume that understanding is always sympathetic. Very often we use the phrase, "I understand," to mean something kindly, warm, and gracious. But there is an understanding that is hard, cold, minute, and deadly. It is the kind of understanding that one gives to the enemy, or that is derived from an accurate knowledge of another's power to injure. There is an understanding of another's weakness, which may be used as a weapon of offense or defense. Understanding that is not the outgrowth of an essential fellow feeling is likely to be unsympathetic. Of course, there may be pity in it, even compassion sometimes, but sympathy, almost never. I can sympathize only when I see myself in another's place. Unsympathetic understanding is the characteristic attitude governing the relation between the weak and the strong. All kinds of first aid may be rendered to the weak. They may be protected so long as there is the abject acknowledgement of their utter dependence upon the strong. In the third place, an unsympathetic understanding tends to express itself in the active functioning of ill will. A few years ago, I was going from Chicago to Memphis, Tennessee. I found a seat across from an elderly lady who took immediately cognizance of my presence. When the conductor came along for the ticket, she said to him, pointing in my direction, "What is that doing in this car?" The conductor answered with a touch of creative humor, "That has a ticket." For the next 50 miles, this lady talked for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes with each person who had seated alone, setting forth her philosophy of human relationships and the basis of her objection to my presence in the car. Remember again, this is a black man writing in 1949. I was able to see the atmosphere in the car shift from common indifference to active recognition of, and to some extent, positive resentment of my presence, and ill will spreading its virus by contagion. In the fourth place, ill will, when dramatized in a human being, becomes hatred walking on the earth. I want you to take that in again. In the fourth place, ill will, when dramatized in a human being, becomes hatred walking on the earth. The outline is now complete and simple. Contacts without fellowship developing hatred and expressing themselves in unsympathetic understanding. An unsympathetic understanding tending to express itself in the exercise of ill will. And ill will, dramatized in a man or woman, becoming hatred walking on the earth. In many analyses of hatred, it is customary to apply it only to the attitude of the strong towards the weak. Hatred, in the mind and spirit of the disinherited, is born out of great bitterness, a bitterness that is made possible by a sustained resentment which is bottled up until it distills an essence of vitality, giving to the individual in whom this is happening a radical and fundamental basis for self-realization. Let me illustrate this. Suppose you are one of 5 children in a family, and it happened again and again that if there was just enough for 4 children in any given circumstance, you were the child who had to do without. If there was money for 4 pairs of shoes and 5 pairs were needed, it was you who did without shoes. If there were 5 pieces of cake on the plate, 4 healthy slices and 1 small piece, you were given the last small slice. At first, when this happened, you overlooked it because you thought that your brothers and sisters, each in his turn, would have the same experience, but they did not. Then you complained quietly to the brother who was closest to you in understanding, and he thought that you were being disloyal to your mother and father to say such a thing. In a moment of self-righteousness, you spoke to your father about it. Your father put you on the carpet so severely that you decided not to mention it ever again, but you kept on watching. The discrimination continued. At night, when the lights were out and you were safely tucked away in your bed, you reached down into the quiet places of your little heart and lifted out your bundle of hates and resentments growing out of the family situation, and you fingered them gently one by one. In the darkness, you muttered to yourself, "They can keep me from talking about it to them, but they can't keep me from resenting it. I hate them for what they are doing to me. No one can prevent me here." Hatred comes for you as a source of validation for your personality. As you consider the family and their attitude toward you, your hatred gives you a sense of significance, for which you fling defiantly into the teeth of their estimate of you. In Herman Melville's Moby Dick, there is an expression of this attitude. You would doubtless recall this story. Ahab has his leg bitten off in an encounter with a white whale. He collects a motley crew and they sail into the northern seas to find and conquer the whale. As the storm comes up at sea and Ahab stands on the deck with his ivory leg fastened to the floor, he leans against the railing in utter defiance of the storm. His hair is disheveled, his face is furrowed, and there is a fever in his blood that only the conquest of the white whale can cure. In effect, he says to the lightning, "You may destroy this vessel, you may dry up the bowels of the sea, you may consume me, but I can still be ashes." It is this kind of attitude that is developed in the mind and soul of the weak and the disinherited. As they look out upon their world, they recognize at once that they are the victims of a systematic denial of the rights and privileges that are theirs by virtue both of their human beingness and of their citizenship. Their acute problem is to deal with the estimate that their environment places upon them, for the environment through its power-controlling and prestige-bearing representatives, has announced to them that they do not rate anything other than that which is being visited upon them. If they accept this judgment, then the grounds of their self-estimate is destroyed, and their acquiescence becomes an endorsement of the judgment of the environment. Because they are despised, they despise themselves. If they reject the judgment, hatred may serve as a device for rebuilding, step by perilous step, the foundation for individual significance, so that from within the intensity of their necessity, they declare their right to exist, despite the judgment of the environment. A distinct derivative from hatred's contribution to self-realization, when self-realization is established as a rallying point for the personality, is the tremendous source of dynamic energy provided. Surplus energy is created and placed at the disposal of the individual's needs and ends. In a sense, the whole personality is alerted. All kinds of supports for implementing one's affirmed position are seized upon. A strange new cunning possesses the mind, and every opportunity for taking advantage for defeating the enemy is revealed in clear perspective. One of the salient ways by which it expresses itself is the quality of endurance that appears. It is the sort of thing that causes a little boy, when he is being overpowered by a big boy, to refrain from tears or from giving any expression that will reveal the depths of his pain and hurt. He says to himself grimly, "I'll die before I cry." I have already pointed out that the relationship between the strong and the weak is characterized often by its amoral aspect. When hatred serves as dissemination of self-realization, the illusion of righteousness is easy to create. Often there are but thin lines between bitterness, hatred, self-realization, defiance, and righteous indignation. The logic of the strong-weak relationship is to place all moral judgment of behavior out of bounds. A type of behavior that under normal circumstances will call for self-condemnation can very easily under these special circumstances be regarded as necessary and therefore defensible. To take advantage of the strong is regarded merely as settling an account. It is open season all the time without the operation of normal moral inhibitions. It is the form of the old lex talionis, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Thus, hatred becomes the device by which an individual seeks to protect himself against moral disintegration. He does to other human beings what he could not ordinarily do to them without losing his own self-respect. This is an aspect of hatred that is almost universal application during a time of war and national crisis. Doubtless, you will recall that during the last war, a very interesting defense of hatred appeared in America, again in 1949. The reasoning ran something like this. American boys have grown up in a culture and a civilization in which they have absorbed certain broad attitudes of respect for human personality and other traits characteristic of gentlemen of refinement and dignity. Therefore, they are not prepared psychologically or emotionally to become human war machines, to make themselves conscious instruments of death. Something radical has to happen to their personality and their overall outlook to render them more effective tools for destruction. The most effective way by which this transformation can be brought about is through discipline and hatred. For if they hate the enemy, then that hatred will immunize them from the loss of moral self-respect as they do to the enemy what is demanded of them in the successful prosecution of war. To use a figure, a curtain was dropped in front of their moral values and their ethical integrity as human beings and Americans, and they moved around in front of that curtain to do their death-dealing work on other human beings. The curtain of protection was the disciplined hatred. A simple illustration of what I mean in this, there are some people who cannot tell you to face precisely what they think of you unless they get angry first. Anger serves as a protection of their finer sense of values as they look you in the eye and say things which under ordinary circumstances they would not be able to say. We're at about 24 minutes right now, and I can tell you my voice is getting tired, my emotions are getting tired, so I'm going to cease reading here. If you have any interest in hearing more readings similar to this, please comment, leave us a review, etc. I'm going to close this out with that last line again. I think it is super powerful and especially created for the moment that we're in. It serves to focus us on when we're putting out our opinion, when we think that our belief is important enough to disrupt the peace. Let's evaluate this before we put out what we are going to say into the light of the public, into the minds of our families. If you're parents, it's really important that you're talking about things with your children on a regular basis so they know the world when it's time for them to get out there in it on their own. There's only so many protections that we can provide our children in the digital age. They are exposed to a lot, fortunately and unfortunately. Obviously, this is not a discussion for today. We can get into that another time. But I'm going to wrap us up with the final line. Anger serves as a protection of their finer senses of value as they look you in the eye and say things which under ordinary circumstances they would not be able to say. Are you putting hard lines in the sand? Are you putting words and thoughts and beliefs and opinions out there that normally under ordinary circumstances you would not be able to look someone eye to eye and say? I notice a lot on social media, comments. I'm a big comment reader because I like to kind of examine, for our work at Educator Aid, kind of the climate of what's going on in the world and how people are perceiving different ideas and notions. I see a lot of people putting things out there that I don't know if they instantly regret or if they feel stronger for, or what is in their mind, but definitely I don't picture some of these same people sharing in the way face-to-face in civil discourse to friends, family, community members, etc., that they would be putting out there into. Now, granted, it is online, it is the internet, but fortunately for us, it is something that we deal with day to day, and it also serves to escalate our public opinions, perceptions, beliefs, and how we treat one another. If you are a person that is constantly in your life looking for the peaceful side of things, I would just challenge you to ingest this little message lesson for your Saturday, for your Sunday. Contemplate it deeply, because I believe personally that peacemakers and pacifists will have a role in the coming days ahead of trying to bring together two very extreme ideas into a place of loving civil discourse to which we can actually then problem solve. As I believe for myself, I also believe onto others in the same way, that everything that we do in our world starts with us. As an individual, then it seeps out into our family, if we have a partner, if we have children, if we have extended families that we're involved with. And then from there, it extends into our workplace. That extension goes into the schools where we get our educations. That goes into our activities that we do on a community level. Then it goes a little bit wider than that. If we're socially sharing online, it's not quite as personable as at a community and family level, obviously, but your communication is getting out there, and who are you rippling into with your circle of influence, and how are you disseminating that message? Is it one of peace, compassion, flexibility of ideas, an openness to learning a new perspective, or have you already made up your have you made up your mind from the outset based on what you think you need to believe in order to be accepted by your in-group? What I can tell you in my own observation, popular opinion is not so popular. If you take a very hard stance on an issue that is very nuanced, it actually calls more attention to your hard stance as being an extreme stance or extremist. If that is what you want to be known for in your daily walk, in your daily circle of influence, and how you influence the world around you, so be it. That is your personal decision between yourself and your creator. But if you are interested in more than just putting out your opinion, and actually having some sort of positive influence, loving influence, compassionate influence on the world around you. I highly recommend that you go ahead and purchase this book, Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman. Again, it's a very challenging piece of work. However, I think it's very valuable to understand perhaps a different point of view from a different time. History has a lot to teach us. Being a peacekeeper does not mean keeping the peace as in being silent. But make sure, as the scriptures say, that your words are seasoned with salt before you go spreading them around. Colossians 4:6 says, "Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you should answer each person." And with that, 30 minutes in, I'll leave you with your own thoughts and reflections. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. It's a little heavier than normal. We like to try to keep things uplifted and enlightening here. However, the course of the world, will do what the world does, and we really have no control over that. I did feel it was important to put out some sort of an education on peace and hate during this time that causes us to pause and reflect on our own beliefs, opinions, and motivations for how we reach out into the world. Make sure to tune in every Friday for a brand new episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. We give you free resources on our podcast, plus our YouTube channel at Educator Aid. If you're interested in getting free professional development, we put out lots of workshops, at least one a week, where we give you great professional development for yourselves and then also for your organizations if you choose to take our videos back to use with your organizations. Be sure to check out all of our resources on educatoraid.com, and we'll see you next time.